Well, the lesson, if you have the bulletin in front of you, is entitled, Have You Ever Had One of Those Days? And I've had one of those moments already because Zach had to help me do the PowerPoint system because I forgot to convert it over to the older version. And so some of the slides didn't, well, they look really funky. So anyways, thank you, Zach, for helping me out. And this lesson was actually a lesson that I had preached in Idaho. When Sharon and I lived up there, I worked at a program that was called the Lewis Clark Early Childhood Program, which was a Head Start up there. I started out there as a cook assistant and a custodian, and then later became the cook. I never really felt comfortable in that position. And when I was converting all of my lessons over from Microsoft Works to Microsoft Word, I found this lesson. And I'm sure all of us have had, one of those days, but I never actually recorded one of those days, except this one. And that's what I want to present to you this evening. Because all of the other days that I've ever had, I pretty much have forgotten. And I really don't remember those days. I mean, obviously at the point in time that it happened, yeah, I remember them. And another thing was, it almost seemed like it was always a full moon when stuff would happen. So if you've ever worked in the food service business, you're going to be able to relate to some of this that I'm going to be bringing out this evening. If you ever lived where it snows, and you shovel snow, then you're going to be able to relate to some of the things that I'm bringing out. So what I want to do this evening is I want to read to you what I wrote then, because when I look back over this, I'd completely forgotten that. So this is what I had wrote. Now I'm going to read. Have you ever had one of those days? I'm sure most of us have. Last Thursday was one of those days. First, I woke up, which is a good thing, and looked outside. There was light dusting of snow, no big deal, but then I soon realized that it wasn't a past tense snow, it was a present reality snow. Okay, it's not that bad, maybe a quarter inch. By the time Sharon and I drove into work, though, it seemed to be a good 3 inches, which means I'm going to be shoveling a lot of snow at the school. And I was already expecting to do that, but just not a whole lot. Now, on the way in, I remembered that I needed eggs for the chicken pot pie that I needed to make for the kids for their lunch. The day before, I went to Rosar's. That's a grocery store in Moscow, Idaho. And when I got there, it was really windy. And when I opened up the door, I immediately smelled donuts. Well, I was trying to lay off those things. So now this is Thursday morning. Sharon and I pull up to Rosar's. And here comes a guy carrying a box of donuts. And I was like, oh my goodness, another temptation. Well, I passed it, got my eggs, dropped Sharon off at work, headed up to school. And yep, there was a good 4 inches of snow by my prejudiced eye, because living in California, 1 inch seemed like 4. It was probably a good, 3.5 inches. So anyways, so I hustle inside and I start cooking chicken soup with some cream of potato soup in there for the chicken pot pie, and I'm doing that now because I've got to go out and shovel this snow. I spent 40 minutes or so shoveling and putting down ice melt, making really clear paths for the children and parents in the upper parking lot, as well as for the deliveries that I'm expecting that morning in the lower parking lot. The lower parking lot had an incline that went down to the road, and there is no way that trucks can back up when it's snowing to deliver the deliveries. They can't do it. So they have to do it from the road, which means they're going to have to walk up this incline, which means that I'm going to shovel a path down there and put ice melt so that they don't slip and fall. I spent about 40 minutes doing that. Now I'm back inside dealing with cooking, and about 20 minutes after I finished outside, all of a sudden I hear a really weird sound. I was like, what is that? I go outside, and the lower parking lot is being plowed by a guy with a truck. And so my beautiful path that I had down to the road is gone. It's just gone. Okay, well, thankfully I've got more ice melt. So I just spread out more ice melt down there so that when they come up, they're not slipping and falling. So that was like, okay, this day is already getting weird. Now I'm getting ready to make muffins, but I decided to wait until 8 o'clock in the morning to start them because I wanted them to be warm for the kids because it's snowing. And they're going to eat around 8:45 for the breakfast. At around 8:20, my timer goes off. So I open the top oven. There's a top oven and a bottom oven. The top oven has 1 rack, the bottom oven has 2 racks. So I open up the top oven, the muffins look awesome. I open up the bottom oven, and I stare in disbelief at 2 trays of muffins that are as uncooked as when I first put them in. Did I forget to turn the oven on? No, I turned it on. The oven had failed. Thankfully, a lot of the kids there at the school took a long time to wash their hands. So I had time to bake off those muffins and have them ready by 8:45. Okay, now I usually receive my deliveries of food in London between 7:30 and 8 o'clock. Well, it's well past 9:30, and because of the washing up of the dishes and the pans from the breakfast, I realized that none of my deliveries have showed up. Okay, it's snowing. Maybe the road conditions are hampering. The only problem is that I'm expecting a food delivery from FSA, which is Food Services of America, and they've got vegetables that I absolutely need in order to continue to make this chicken pot pie. So it's after 9:30 when I'm realizing this. And all of a sudden I realized I can't make the chicken pot pie because my oven is out. And I need to serve the first lunch in less than an hour. Well, I thank God that I hadn't made the topping for the chicken pot pie with the eggs because they're raw. And I would have had to throw the entire thing out. So my chicken pot pie turned into chicken chowder without vegetables. Around 11:15, just after serving the second lunch, FSA finally shows up. I guess they had a new person working in there that day, and instead of being one of the first deliveries, we were the last delivery. They just didn't know which ones to put first and foremost, so that's why they didn't show up. But when he does show up, now I've got to deal with the food that has come in, the frozen and the fresh produce. And so I had an assistant, her name was Jessica. And when that came in, I'm usually cleaning the bathrooms because I was also a custodian at that time. So, okay, the bathroom's going to be put on hold. We're going to go deal with this. We're dealing with this. And while all the deliveries are coming in, so are the dishes from the lunches coming back. So everything is piling up. And so we finally get everything put away, and thank God the dishwashing machine worked. So we spent all the next time just getting all the dishes and everything put away. And unfortunately, Jessica had to leave early, and she always deals with the snacks for me. Now it's time for these snacks, and again, because the lower oven doesn't work, I've had to make changes, but thank goodness my delivery showed up because I can give the kids what was called giant graham goldfish, about that big. The kids loved them. Okay, they're going to get sliced oranges. So the first snack needs to be ready by 1:15. I finally get it down there because I have to get it down to them. So I'm thinking that, okay, maybe this day, it's finally getting better. The deliveries are in. I'm caught up. I finally am able to clean the bathrooms. And so I return to the kitchen, and it's about 10 minutes to 2. So I go check on the first snack to see how far they've gotten along. And they're almost completely finished. So I return to the kitchen, I open up the refrigerator, and I see 6 containers of sliced oranges. There should only be 3. I forgot to give sliced oranges to the first snack. I was like, oh my goodness. I mean, the poor kids, all they had was a giant graham cracker with milk. At least the final snack, the teachers were going to deliver it, and everything was there. So that went on like that throughout that day, and during that day, I was pretty much grumbling to myself, talking about Tim's lesson this morning about grumbling. I was grumbling to myself. I don't really remember if I was doing it out loud to the teacher, certainly not to the children, but I might have been doing it to Jessica, poor thing. Anyways, so after all of that, I'm driving home and I think, in the grand scheme of things, this day could have been far worse. And really, in comparison with all that was going on in the world, and is still going on, it was really nothing. And this little pity party, as my wife likes to call it, that I've been having with myself during the day, was it really worth it? Well, no. Driving home, all of a sudden I thought about the apostles of Christ, and some of the days that they went through in their lives. In comparison to that, my day at that school was just really trivial. Because the apostles had much more than one of those days. Now, in the bulletin, I had chapters in here. That's because I wasn't sure which scriptures I really wanted to read. And so I just put chapters in there. But also the other reason is because to encourage you to read the context of these verses. But there is a number of verses that I would like to read. The ones on the screen here, I want to read back to back to back, because it's just one continuous narrative from the gospel accounts, beginning in Luke chapter 22. At verse 1 it is written, "Now the feast of unleavened bread drew nigh, which is called the Passover. And the chief priests and scribes sought how they might kill him," that is Jesus, "for they feared the people. Then entered Satan into Judas, surnamed Iscariot, being of the number of the 12. And he went his way, and communed with the chief priests and captains, how he might betray him unto them. And they were glad and coveted to give him money. And he promised and sought opportunity to betray him unto them in the absence of the multitude. Then came the day of unleavened bread, when the Passover must be killed. And he sent Peter and John, saying, Go and prepare us the Passover, that we may eat. And they said unto him, Where wilt thou that we prepare? And he said unto them, Behold, when ye are entered into the city, there shall a man meet you, bearing a pitcher of water. Follow him into the house where he entereth in. And ye shall say to the good man of the house, The master saith unto thee, Where is the guest chamber, where I shall eat the Passover with my disciples? And he shall show you a large upper room furnished. There make ready. And they went and found as he had said unto them. And they made ready the Passover. And when the hour was come, he sat down, and the 12 apostles with him. And he said unto them, With desire, I have desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. For I say unto you, I will not any more eat thereof until it be fulfilled in the kingdom of God. And he took the cup and gave thanks and said, Take this and divide it among yourselves. For I say unto you, I will not drink of the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of God shall come. And he took bread and gave thanks and brake it and gave unto them, saying, This is my body which is given for you. This do in remembrance of me. Likewise also the cup after supper, saying, This cup is the New Testament in my blood, which is shed for you. And then turning back to Mark chapter 14, I want to begin reading at verse 26. It is written, And when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. And Jesus saith unto them, All ye shall be offended because of me this night. For it is written, I will smite the shepherd, and the sheep shall be scattered. But after that I am risen, I will go before you into Galilee. But Peter said unto him, Although all shall be offended, yet will not I. And Jesus saith unto him, Verily I say unto thee, that this day, even in this night, before the cock crow twice, thou shalt deny me thrice. But he spake the more vehemently, If I should die with thee, I will not deny thee in any wise. Likewise also said they all. And they came to a place which was named Gethsemane, and saith to his disciples, Sit ye here, while I shall pray. And he taketh with him Peter and James and John, and began to be sore amazed, and to be very heavy. And he saith unto them, My soul is exceeding sorrowful unto death. Tarry ye here, and watch. And he went forward a little, and fell on the ground, and prayed that, if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, Abba, Father, all things are possible unto thee. Take away this cup from me. Nevertheless, not what I will, but what thou wilt. And he cometh and findeth them sleeping, and saith unto Peter, Simon, sleepest thou? Couldest not thou watch 1 hour? Watch ye and pray, lest ye enter into temptation. The spirit truly is ready, but the flesh is weak. And again he went away and prayed and spake the same words. And when he returned, he found them asleep again, for their eyes were heavy. Neither wist they what to answer him. And he cometh the third time and saith unto them, Sleep on now, take your rest. It is enough, the hour is come. Behold, the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise up, let us go. Lo, he that betrayeth me is at hand. And immediately, while he yet spake, cometh Judas, one of the 12. And with him a great multitude with swords and staves, from the chief priests and the scribes and the elders. And he that betrayed him had given them a token, saying, Whomsoever I shall kiss, that same is he. Take him and lead him away safely. And as soon as he was come, he goeth straightway to him and saith, Master, Master, and kissed him. And they laid their hands on him and took him. And then in Matthew chapter 26, beginning at verse 51, it is written, And behold, one of them which were with Jesus stretched out his hand, and drew a sword, and struck a servant of the high priest, and smote off his ear. Then said Jesus unto him, Put up again thy sword into his place, for all they that take the sword shall perish with the sword. Thinkest thou that I cannot now pray to my Father, and he shall presently give me more than 12 legions of angels? But how then shall the scriptures be fulfilled, that thus it must be? In that same hour said Jesus to the multitudes, Are ye come out as against a thief with swords and staves for to take me? I sat daily with you teaching in the temple, and ye laid no hold on me. But all this was done, that the scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled. Then all the disciples forsook him and fled. And they that had laid hold on Jesus led him away to Caiaphas the high priest, where the scribes and the elders were assembled. But Peter followed him afar off unto the high priest's palace, and went in and sat with the servants to see the end. Now the chief priests and elders and all the council sought false witness against Jesus to put him to death, but found none. Yea, though many false witnesses came, yet found they none. At the last came 2 false witnesses, and said, This fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God, and to build it in 3 days. And the high priest arose and said unto him, Answerest thou nothing? What is it which these witness against thee? But Jesus held his peace. And the high priest answered and said unto him, I adjure thee by the living God, that thou tell us whether thou be the Christ, the Son of God. Jesus saith unto him, Thou hast said. Nevertheless I say unto you, hereafter shall you see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power, and coming in the clouds of heaven. Then the high priest rent his clothes, saying, He has spoken blasphemy. What further need have we of witnesses? Behold, now ye have heard his blasphemy. What think ye? They answered and said, He is guilty of death. Then did they spit in his face, and buffeted him. And others smote him with the palms of their hands, saying, Prophesy unto us, thou Christ. Who is he that smote thee? Now Peter sat without in the palace, and the damsel came unto him, saying, Thou also was with Jesus of Galilee. But he denied before them all, saying, I know not what thou sayest. And when he was gone out into the porch, another saw him, and said unto them that were there, This fellow was also with Jesus of Nazareth. And again he denied with an oath, I do not know the man. And after a while came unto him they that stood by, and said to Peter, Surely thou also art one of them, for thy speech bewrayeth thee. Then began he to curse and to swear, saying, I know not the man. And immediately the cock crew. And Peter remembered the word of Jesus, which said unto him, Before the cock crow, thou shalt deny me thrice. And he went out and wept bitterly. And when the morning was come, all the chief priests and elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. And when they had bound him, they led him away and delivered him to Pontius Pilate, the governor. In less than 24 hours, these men had gone from sharing the feast of the Passover with their Lord to forsaking and denying him. But worse, obviously, was still coming. I want you to turn back to Luke chapter 23. We're going to pick up at verse 13. Luke chapter 23, beginning at verse 13, it is written, And Pilate, when he had called together the chief priests and the rulers and the people, said unto them, You have brought this man unto me as one that perverted the people. And behold, I, having examined him before you, have found no fault in this man touching those things whereof ye accuse him. No, nor yet Herod. For I sent you to him, and lo, nothing worthy of death is done in him. I will therefore chastise him and release him. For of necessity he must release one unto them at the feast. And they cried out all at once, saying, Away with this man, and release unto us Barabbas, who for a certain sedition made in the city, and for murder was cast into prison. Pilate, therefore, willing to release Jesus, spake again to them. But they cried, saying, Crucify him, crucify him. And he said unto them the third time, Why? What evil hath he done? I have found no cause of death in him. I will therefore chastise him and let him go. And they were instant with loud voices, requiring that he might be crucified. And the voices of them and of the chief priests prevailed. And Pilate gave sentence that it should be as they required. And he released unto them him that for sedition and murder was cast into prison, whom they had desired. But he delivered Jesus to their will. And as they led him away, they laid hold upon one Simon the Cyrenian, coming out of the country. And on him they laid the cross, that he might bear it after Jesus. And there followed him a great company of people and of women, which also bewailed and lamented him. But Jesus, turning unto them, said, Daughters of Jerusalem, weep not for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For, behold, the days are coming, in the which they shall say, Blessed are the barren, and the wombs that never bear, and the paps which never gave suck. Then shall they begin to say to the mountains, Fall on us, and to the hills, Cover us. For if they do these things in a green tree, what shall be done in the dry? And there were also two other malefactors led with him to be put to death. When they were come to the place which is called Calvary, there they crucified him and the malefactors, one on the right hand and the other on the left. Then said Jesus, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And they parted his raiment and cast lots. And the people stood beholding. And the rulers also with them derided him, saying, He saved others. Let him save himself, if he be Christ, the chosen of God. And the soldiers also mocked him, coming to him and offering him vinegar and saying, If thou be the King of the Jews, save thyself. And a superscription also was written over him in letters of Greek and Latin and Hebrew, This is the King of the Jews. And one of the malefactors which were hanged railed on him, saying, If thou be Christ, save thyself and us. But the other answering rebuked him, saying, Does not thou fear God, seeing thou art in the same condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we receive the due reward of our deeds. But this man hath done nothing amiss. And he said unto Jesus, Lord, remember me when thou comest into thy kingdom. And Jesus said unto him, Verily I say unto thee, today shalt thou be with me in paradise. And it was about the 6th hour, and there was a darkness over all the earth until the 9th hour. And the sun was darkened, and the veil of the temple was rent in the midst. And when Jesus had cried with a loud voice, he said, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. And having said thus, he gave up the ghost. Now when the centurion saw what was done, he glorified God, saying, Certainly this was a righteous man. And all the people that came together to that sight, beholding the things which were done, smote their breasts and returned. And all his acquaintance and the women that followed him from Galilee stood afar off, beholding these things. You know, those 2 days that the disciples endured, I don't know if it's going to do that. It's not going forward. Okay, pretend you don't see this. In fact, that's not even going to do that. This is one of those times again. Those 2 days that the disciples endured, they couldn't have been much blacker. I mean, think about what they had witnessed with Christ the whole time they had been with him. The wonders, the miracles that they had experienced. And now, they're engulfed in sorrow and fear. They were afraid. And yet, even in spite of that, and in spite of the days that we have, life still goes on. If you read the entire chapter, following what we've just read here in Luke chapter 23, if you read chapter 24, it begins with women, they're going to the tomb. They're carrying spices and they're going to go there. And of course, they find the tomb empty. And an angel speaks unto them. And then you read of these two individuals, and they're traveling that day. Life goes on. And that's what I find interesting about this. But their lives were going to change dramatically. Those women and those two individuals. Of course, they encounter Jesus, and they don't realize at first who he is. But then they realize who it is when he eats with them. So in Luke chapter 24, I want to begin at verse 25, where Jesus proclaims unto them, O fools and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Ought not Christ to have suffered these things to enter into his glory? And beginning at Moses and all the prophets, he expounded unto them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. And they drew nigh to the village whither they went. And he made as though he would have gone further, but they constrained him, saying, Abide with us, for it is toward evening, and the day is far spent. And he went in to tarry with them. And it came to pass, as he sat at meat with them, he took bread, and blessed it, and brake, and gave to them. And their eyes were opened, and they knew him, and he vanished out of their sight. They returned immediately to the others. And of course, the others find it hard to believe what they've been hearing, that Jesus has arisen. They didn't know or fully understand the scriptures or what Jesus had been telling them for days in essence. Life went on, but as I said, life was now going to change. Living in this world has, as Max Bradford, and he's the individual I studied under concerning becoming a preacher, and he taught me concerning the hardships of being a preacher. He would use the phrase, whenever I encountered something that was just really difficult to deal with, he used the phrase that they're just little bumps in the road. And I told Max, I go, Max, there may be a little bump to you, but to me it's a brick wall. Because that's what it felt like some of the days, and especially as a preacher. Because there are things, and I'm sure Brent can attest to this, and the elders here as well, there are things that you deal with that in a quote-unquote secular job you don't deal with. And so there are days like that. Well, like a storm, they end. The days that we have that are one of those days, they come to an end. What really matters is how we handle them, how we view them, and our attitude toward them. And on that drive home with Sharon, not only did I think about the apostles, but I thought about Job and things that he went through. I can't imagine what that man experienced in a matter of days. So I want you to turn with me to Job chapter 1. Job chapter 1. I'm going to begin reading at verse 13. It is written, "And there was a day when his sons and his daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house. And there came a messenger unto Job and said, The oxen were plowing, and the asses feeding beside them. And the Sabaeans fell upon them and took them away. Yea, they have slain the servants with the edge of the sword, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee. While he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, The fire of God is fallen from heaven, and hath burned up the sheep and the servants, and consumed them. And I only am escaped alone to tell thee. While he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, The Chaldeans have made out 3 bands, and fell upon the camels, and have carried them away, yea, and slain the servants with the edge of the sword. And I only am escaped alone to tell thee. While he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, Thy sons and thy daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house. And behold, there came a great wind from the wilderness, and smote the 4 corners of the house. And it fell upon the young men, and they are dead. And I only am escaped alone to tell thee. Then Job arose, and rent his mantle, and shaved his head, and fell down upon the ground, and worshipped. And said, Naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. Do you see how he handled that? He fell down and worshipped. With all that went on, I can't imagine that. I mean, he lost all of his earthly wealth because wealth was in animals in those days. But of far more significance was his family. He lost almost his entire family, except his wife, and of course, she wasn't very supportive of him. So that's that day. Chapter 2, beginning at verse 1. Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. And Satan also came among them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said unto Satan, From whence camest thou? And Satan answered the Lord and said, From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. And the Lord said unto Satan, Hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and an upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil? And still he holdeth fast to his integrity, although thou movest me against him, to destroy him without cause. And Satan answered the Lord and said, Skin for skin, yea, all that a man hath will he give for his life. But put forth thine hand now, and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse thee to thy face. The Lord said unto Satan, Behold, he is in thy hand, but save his life. So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord, and smote Job with sore boils from the sole of his foot unto his crown. And he took him a potsherd to scrape himself withal. And he sat down among the ashes. Then said his wife unto him, Dost thou still retain thine integrity? Curse God and die. But he said unto her, Thou speakest as one of the foolish women speaketh. What? Shall we receive good at the hand of God, and shall we not receive evil? In all this did not Job sin with his lips. He didn't. You know, when I look back on the day that I had, there was a lot of things that went right. It was, after all, a pretty good day. The dishwasher worked. I had a great coworker. I had a great boss up there. The kids were fed, and they actually liked that chicken chowder that I'd made. And in the end, I was able to pick up from her work the wife that I love, that I adore. We were able to go home to a house that we were blessed with. And we had a dog named Pippin who absolutely adored Sharon, run by me to go greet her. So really, when I got to thinking about it, it was really a good day. And when I really got to thinking about it in a spiritual aspect, all the blessings that God has given to me far outshine any day that I may have that's not good. Think about Job at the end. Turn to chapter 42, beginning at verse 10. Job chapter 42, beginning at verse 10. It is written, "And the Lord turned the captivity of Job when he had prayed for his friends. Also the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before. Then came there unto him all his brethren, and all his sisters, and all they that had been of his acquaintance before, and did eat bread with him in his house. And they moaned him and comforted him over all the evil that the Lord had brought upon him. Every man also gave him a piece of money, and every one an earring of gold. So the Lord blessed the later end of Job more than his beginning. For he had 14,000 sheep, and 6,000 camels, and 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 she-asses. He also had 7 sons and 3 daughters, and he called the daughters these names right here. And in all the land there were no women found so fair as the daughters of Job, and their father gave them inheritance among their brethren. After this lived Job 140 years, and saw his sons and his sons' sons, even 4 generations. So Job died being old and full of days." Talk about the blessings that he received. I really like what Brent had to write in the bulletin. And it's under point number 3, letter A there. Brent had wrote, "Even in the most difficult and challenging times in our lives, God blesses us immeasurably." And that's true. And when I think about the apostles, in the eyes of the world, the days that the apostles were going to endure, they would look at them as more than just one of those days. How can you continue doing this for this person that you believe in? Because of their faith. And because of their faith, yes, they endured much, but they overcame these things. And even while enduring things, they counted it as a blessing for God. And that's far different than trying to cook at a school for little children. Because we're talking about religious, spiritual matters that are ultimately far more important. Don't get me wrong, cooking in a school is important. It needs to be done, especially for these little guys in this Head Start program. The whole idea of Head Start is to give them a head start in life. And that's a wonderful thing. But far more important is to make sure that our faith is being manifested to them, to all, in the things that we say, the things that we do, and how we handle one of those days. I want you to turn to the book of Acts, chapter 5. The apostles are arrested, thrown into prison. An angel of God releases them. They go out and they're preaching Jesus Christ, and they're brought again before the council. They had been commanded, "Don't you preach and teach in the name of Jesus. Don't you bring this doctrine into this city or his blood upon us." They're just simply preaching the truth. Toward the end of Acts chapter 5, after Gamaliel refrains them from trying to stone the apostles, in essence, to put them to death, we read beginning at verse 40, "And to him they agreed. And when they had called the apostles and beaten them, they commanded that they should not speak in the name of Jesus, and let them go. And they departed from the presence of the council, rejoicing that they were counted worthy to suffer shame for his name. And daily in the temple and in every house, they ceased not to teach and preach Jesus." Turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 11. 2 Corinthians chapter 11. Beginning at verse 24, what Paul had written to these brethren. "Of the Jews, 5 times received I 40 stripes, save one." Have you ever been spanked as a child? I have. Did your dad ever use a belt? Of course, nowadays that would be unheard of. But, yep, I was spanked with a belt. At the time, I thought I was going to die. It was painful. 5 times he received 40 stripes, save one, and that's not a belt. It's almost like being scourged in a sense. "Thrice I was beaten with rods. Once was I stoned. Thrice I suffered shipwreck. A night and a day I've been in the deep, in journeyings often, in perils of waters, in perils of robbers, in perils by my own countrymen, in perils by the heathen, in perils in the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils among false brethren, in weariness and painfulness, in watchings often, in hunger and thirst, in fastings often, and in cold and nakedness. Beside those things are without that which cometh upon me daily, the care of all the churches. And then going into chapter 12, he talks about this thing that he had been experiencing, this thorn in the flesh, and he had prayed 3 times that it might be removed. Chapter 12, beginning of verse 9, and he, Jesus, said unto me, my grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Paul then writes, most gladly, therefore, will I rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in necessities, in persecutions, in distresses for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then am I strong. That's why I had the scripture reading of 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 6 through 11. Casting all our care upon God, because he cares for us. Satan is out there. He's going to try to destroy our faith and use whatever means he can to destroy it. And I think one of the methods he uses is one of those days. To cause us to not focus upon God, but to focus upon self, which is what I was doing that day. I'm a preacher cooking at the school, and I'm thinking about self. I'm throwing, as I said what Sharon called, a pity party for myself. For what? And ultimately, what good did it do? Well, the good that came out of it was to realize, really, it wasn't a bad day. There are people in this world suffering a lot more than I was as a cook in a restaurant, in a school. And then I also thought about Hebrews chapter 11. All the different individuals that we read in Hebrews chapter 11 and those that we don't know the names of. So when you get to Hebrews chapter 11, dropping down beginning in verse 32, the writer wrote, what shall I more say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon and of Barak and of Samson and of Jephthah, of David also and Samuel and of the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, wrought righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, waxed valiant in fight, turned to flight the armies of the aliens. Women received their dead raised to life again, and others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection. And others had trial of cruel mockings and scourgings, yea, moreover of bonds and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn asunder, were tempted, were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and in mountains and in dens and caves of the earth. And these all, having obtained a good report through faith, received not the promise. God having provided some better thing for us, that they without us should not be made perfect. Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight, and the sin which does so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him that endured such contradiction of sinners against himself, lest you be wearied and faint in your minds. And the days sometimes that we have, that could do that. That could cause us to become weary, to lose heart, or worse, to lose faith. What really matters when we encounter one of those days, and we're going to encounter days like that, is how we look at them, handle them, and ultimately use them. Are they going to be a glory unto God, or are they going to be a brick wall or a pity party that prevents us from entering into the heavenly city of our Lord and our King? How are we going to handle those days? So in conclusion, I'd like for us to consider Ecclesiastes chapter 3. I thought this appropriate because things happen in our life. And oftentimes things that happen are completely out of our control. What we do have control over, though, is how we look at them, how we handle them, deal with them. That we have in our control. And the best control is the faith that we have in Jesus and the exercise in it of whatever we might encounter. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, beginning at verse 1, it is written, "To everything there is a season, a time to every purpose under the heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to break down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones and a time to gather the stones together. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to get and a time to lose. A time to keep and a time to cast away. A time to rend, a time to sow. A time to keep silence and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time of war and a time of peace. What profit hath he that worketh in that wherein he laboureth? I have seen the travail which God hath given to the sons of men to be exercised in it. He hath made everything beautiful in his time. Also he has set the world in their hearts, so that no man can find out the work that God maketh from the beginning to the end. I know that there is no good in them, but for man to rejoice and to do good in his life. And also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor. It is the gift of God. I know that whatsoever God doeth, it shall be forever. Nothing can be put to it, nor anything taken from it. And God doeth it, that men should fear before him." That fear before him. The next time you encounter one of those days, perhaps you'll reflect upon some of the scriptures that we've looked at and the examples that we find in God's Word of individuals who had much more than one of those days. And in the grand scheme of things, and when I use that, I'm thinking about spiritual things in this life that we think are most important often are the most trivial. What really matters is how we handle them, how we view them, and are we going to use them to glorify our Father in heaven? That's our lesson this evening. And if you are subject to God's invitation, if you need the prayers of the congregation, perhaps you've had one of those days and you really need the prayers, then we would encourage you to come forward now as we all stand and sing this invitation song.